Obama's third term begins, and no dumbest bill in America, or go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, who is now our producer, not our assistant producer. Congratulations, Christopher. Let's hear it. Come on. So this podcast is called Obama's Third Term Begins. Why is it Obama's third term? Well, because if you ever noticed who the people are inside of Biden's administration, the insiders, if you will, they're all previous Obama hacks. And did you even bother to watch the inauguration? And did you see Barack Obama? He was at the inauguration, of course, with his wife, the former First Lady. And what is he saying? He's like, hey, how's it going, guys? How you guys doing down there? It's like waving to people all over the place and saying hi to them. And, just like, having a great time, and isn't this great? We're back in control. I mean, it looked like it was Barack Obama's presidency, his third term to me, because everybody was, gathering around him like he's this great, cult hero. And it was obvious. It was just obvious. And then you look at Joe. Yeah, he was elected president. He's now the president of the United States, but it sure doesn't look like he's like he's all there. So who's going to be pulling the strings? And how are they going to be pulling the strings? Well, who is the press secretary for Joe Biden? Joe Biden's press secretary is, guess who? It is Jen Psaki. And Jen Psaki worked on both of Obama's campaigns. She was the spokesperson at the State Department under Obama. And, of course, now she is the press secretary, the White House press secretary for Joe Biden. So let's read a little bit about who she is. It says, Jen Psaki, throughout the 2008 presidential campaign of U.S. Senator Barack Obama, Psaki served as traveling press secretary. After Obama won the election, Psaki followed Obama to the White House as deputy press secretary and was promoted to deputy communications director on December 19, 2009. On September 22, 2011, Psaki left the position to become senior vice president and managing director at the Washington, D.C. office of public relations firm's Global Strategy Group. In other words, she went outside the administration to make lots of money while the administration was still in power, trading on that, which of course is dirty. And then in 2012, Psaki returned to political communications as press secretary for President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. So she was director for communications and the press secretary for his 2012 campaign as well. On February 11th, 2013, Psaki became spokesperson for the United States Department of State under Barack Obama. Her hiring at the Department of State fueled speculation that she would replace White House Press Secretary Jay Carney when he left the White House. But on May 30th, 2014, it was announced that Josh Earnest would replace Carney. In 2015, she returned to the White House as communications director and stayed through the end of the Obama administration. So what can you, by the way, and on February 7th, 2017, when she left the Obama White House because Obama had finished his second term, she became a political commentator for CNN. That's just so funny. So what is the point here? The point here is Jen Psaki, the new press secretary for Joe Biden, was with Barack Obama from the very beginning of his first campaign to the very end when he left the presidency. She is the ultimate insider and manipulator of Barack Obama. And now she's front and center for the Biden campaign as press secretary. And so, of course, we're calling this Obama's third term and we can give many more examples. But here's just kind of a central example. Do you think for 1 minute that Barack Obama isn't calling her up and saying, hey, Jen, this is some of the things you should talk about to the president, and these are some of the things you should discuss in front of the press because we want to advance our agenda, of making America no longer a republic. So nonetheless, we have Jen Psaki's first press conference. It's her first press conference ever under Joe Biden. And she talks about all the executive orders that Biden signed day one of his presidency. And we have a number of clips on this. We want you to listen to them carefully because it gives you a real feeling about whether Joe Biden is all about unity and bringing people together and reaching out, or whether he is really being manipulated by the former President Barack Obama. So first up, here's Jen Psaki, press secretary. She's listing all of the executive orders, including the mask mandate on federal property, etc. We have that clip, and here it is.
To combat the deadly virus, the president launched his 100-day masking challenge, asking Americans to do their part and mask up for 100 days. He's doing his part as well, issuing a mask mandate that will require anyone visiting a federal building or federal land or using certain modes of public transportation to wear a mask. He signed an executive order reversing Trump's decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization. This will strengthen our own efforts to get the pandemic under control by improving global health. And tomorrow, we're not wasting any time, Dr. Fauci will participate remotely in the meeting of the World Health Organization as the U.S. head of delegation. President Biden also officially appointed a COVID-19 response coordinator, a position and team we had already previously announced, but made it official today, to create a unified national response to the pandemic. And he reestablished the national security team responsible for global health, security, and biodefense.
So Dr. Fauci's back in charge, and he's going to be our point man for the United States at the WHO. Of course, she doesn't really discuss if there are going to be any reforms that Dr. Fauci is going to try to take to the WHO. There's a mask mandate. There are all of these, new mandates, of course, kind of interesting. But we have a number of other clips from Jen Psaki at her first press conference. And you have to listen to these because we're going to build upon them. And here are the additional executive orders. You got to listen to this one. Here it is.
The COVID-19 pandemic has triggered an almost unprecedented housing affordability crisis. He took immediate action to confront the crisis and asked relevant agencies to extend nationwide moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures. The pandemic has also increased the hardship on millions of Americans who owe federal student loans. In response, the president asked the Department of Education to extend the pause on student loan payments and interest. He rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, putting the United States back in a position to exercise global leadership in advancing the objectives of the ambitious agreement.
So we have all of those executive orders, which is free, free, free. First, housing affordability, free housing, okay? Now, to be fair, COVID has made many people unemployed, and therefore, when you're unemployed, you can't pay for your rent, right, or your mortgage. So it's understandable that there needs to be some assistance and help. That's what the stimulus is supposed to do. But instead, in addition to the stimulus, you have money going to folks to help them pay their mortgages. And number two, you have a moratorium on evictions, okay? No one wants to see anyone evicted, but here's the problem. It's a domino effect. What about all the people, of course, who own the property? They still have to pay their mortgages. So in theory, those individuals who own rental properties, who are paying their mortgages, are going to the COVID relief funds and getting that money to, of course, do what? To pay their mortgage company. So at least the banks don't go under as well. So this is a domino effect, and it is quite serious, obviously, and something has to be done. But let's face it, what really has to be done is to open up the darn economy. If you open up the economy, then people can get back to work, they can start paying taxes again, and they can start also, more importantly than that, is of course start actually paying their bills, which is really important. But what this executive order does is it kind of encourages free housing and free college, and of course, doesn't even mention the Paris Climate Agreement, which is a whole other issue, but free college, right? Well, if you have student loans, it's what Jen Psaki said, don't worry, you're not gonna actually have to pay them off at this particular point in time. You're gonna have some forbearance for a while before you have to start catching up with those loans and paying them. You see where all this is headed, podcast listeners? This is headed to try to train people into a mindset that they don't have to pay their bills and that they don't have to, buck government and say, let us go back to work so we can pay our bills. We don't want free stuff from government because we don't want to be dependent upon government. But nonetheless, that's exactly what this particular executive order does. I'm not saying that for a small period of time, it isn't necessary. It probably is necessary for a small period of time to give people some assistance and some forbearance on student loans and for housing affordability, that's fine. But they call it housing affordability. That's not what it is. It's housing forbearance. It's letting you stay in your house for a little bit longer until you get your job back, and then you're still gonna have to catch up on the interest and so forth. Why? Or your rent, because government closed down the economy. And then she talks about the Paris Climate Agreement. And of course, there's a climate emergency. I always ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I always say, can you please define what a climate emergency is? What is climate change? And I got to tell you something, I get literally 100 different answers on that. And that's intentional. It's intentional, I think, because they really don't want any kind of progress because they don't want to be able to define it. If you define it, then you're going to have progress, of course. And they can't define it because it just sounds good, right? The climate is changing. We must stop that. They can't define it. But nonetheless, he's putting us back into the Paris Climate Agreement, which of course is anti-natural gas, anti-oil, anti-anything except wind and solar. Interestingly enough, in Europe, of course, certainly in Paris and in France, nuclear power is very popular. But here in the United States, it's still unpopular, especially with the left, because they want wind and solar and only wind and solar. So next up, we have Jen Psaki and the final executive orders. You just can't believe it. It's like one after another, and it's all not about unity. I'm sorry. Here it is.
And a second broad executive order will roll back harmful regulatory reversals made by the previous administration to protect public health and the environment. This order protects our nation's treasures by reviewing the boundaries for several national monuments, places a temporary moratorium on all oil and natural gas leasing in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and reestablishes the interagency working group on the social cost of greenhouse gases. He also launched a whole-of-government effort to advance racial equity and root out systemic racism from federal programs and institutions. He directed the Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the Attorney General, to take all appropriate actions to preserve and fortify DACA, which provides temporary relief from deportation to Dreamers, young people who were brought to this country as children. The president also put an end to the Muslim ban, of policy rooted in religious animus and xenophobia. He signed a proclamation effective immediately, halting further funding or construction of the previous administration's border wall and terminating the so-called national emergency used to wastefully divert billions for wall construction.
So that was a lot to take in. I know we have to play this for you because it's so important to listen to the unifiers that are in the White House. So, of course, a moratorium on gas exploration because they are anti-fossil fuels. Everybody knows it, despite what good old Joe Biden said on the campaign trail, right? On the one hand, he said, oh, no, I'm for it. And then, of course, no, we're going to get rid of it. We're going to just get rid of it all. Well, now we know what they think. They put a moratorium on it. Next thing, the social costs of greenhouse gases. So we just talked about climate change and how it's so hard to define. And when you ask people on the other side of the aisle, what the heck are the social costs of greenhouse gases? Social costs? I mean, that's all part of the whole climate change stuff, right? Is to make it sounds so good, sounds so seductive, right? There are social costs to greenhouse gases. I would sure like it if a progressive could come on here and tell me what the social costs are, right? Then racial equity. Of course, they're getting into this whole thing of racial equity, which of course is nothing more than Marxism hidden under the idea of that fact that there is systemic racism, because the idea is they want the outcomes to be equal for all people, no matter what effort and inputs you put into your life. And of course, they want to give a free pass for those who are breaking our laws and crossing the border illegally by rewarding them with eventually citizenship. Right now, of course, they're going to look the other way. They're not going to enforce the law. And most importantly, they halted the border wall. Right? Who does that? So you have a border wall, it's already under construction, and you're just going to say, I'm going to stop building the border wall. Why am I going to stop building the border wall? I'm going to stop building it because of the simple fact that I don't think that we should have borders in our country. We really don't. Why? Because Jen Psaki said that one of the executive orders that he signed, that good old Biden signed, was to stop the border wall, and the other was to not round people up, if you will, and deport them even if they're here illegally. So It's basically an invitation for the rest of the world to come into the United States illegally. And of course, we've seen what this looks like. And it was under the 8 years of Barack Obama. And its whole goal is to tilt elections, future elections in the United States, when these individuals can either vote as illegals or they can become citizens and vote. And I want to make this perfectly clear. It's we as conservatives want people to come in the country legally, and we love the fact that they want to come here for an opportunity at a better life and to become citizens and to do so legally. But that is not what the Democrat Party is about, and Jen Psaki just proved it. And if you want to listen to the most epic part of Jen Psaki's very first press conference, right? And if you want proof that Barack Obama's third term has really begun, if you want proof, you have got to listen to what Jen Psaki says at the very beginning of this clip. It is epic. Listen to what she says. It's a complete slip up. And here it is.
Also today, President Biden sent an
She almost said
immigration
President
bill
Obama.
to Congress. The U.S. Citizenship Act modernizes our immigration system. It provides hardworking people who've enriched our communities and lived here for decades an opportunity to earn citizenship. The president's priority reflected in the bill are to responsibly manage the border, keep families together, grow our economy, address the root causes of migration from Central America, and ensure that America can remain a refuge for those fleeing prosecution.
So basically making America, a country where we don't, of course, respect our borders. But what did she say at the very beginning? More importantly than all that, the rest of that, which we all know, of course, which was, and lastly, President Biden literally slipped up. This was her very first press conference. And of course, we're calling this podcast Obama's Third Term Begins. And if you ever want proof of that, there it is. So next up, we have the battle for truth. That is the battle for truth. So a reporter asks Biden press secretary Jen Psaki about, the fact that truth matters. Truth matters. And you have to listen to Jen Psaki's response. And we have a couple of clips on this, and here it is.
Let me ask you on policy, if I can, quickly. You talk, obviously, your role is sort of in terms of delivering the best information to the American people on behalf of this White House. The battle for truth may be as tough a fight right now as is the battle against coronavirus. How do you and President Biden plan to combat disinformation that in many ways led to that assault we witnessed 2 weeks ago today on the Capitol?
Well, I think, Peter, there are a number of ways to combat misinformation. One of them is accurate information and truth and data and sharing information even when it is hard to hear and even when it is not meeting the expectations of people at home who are desperate for this crisis to be over.
So the battle for truth, you heard that answer from Jen Psaki. I mean, it was very vague, right? They're going to be data-driven and, the truth matters. Well, of course the truth matters. But this whole idea of truth, according to the Biden White House and, of course, the Washington press corps, all of these individuals in the press corps, at least for the most part, they are not interested in the battle for truth. They're interested in basically reporting whatever the Biden press secretary and administration tells them to, of course, report. So remember when AOC said she wanted a truth commission? I mean, she literally said that there should be a commission to find out, what the truth is and to make sure that there are like government fact checkers to make sure that there's a certain kind of truth, like a ministry of truth. And we've talked about that before. But what I find fascinating is you hear this, this battle for truth, but do you actually hear any questions from the press corps saying, hey, Jen Psaki, you're the press secretary for the new president. Will President Biden hold China accountable for COVID? That question never came up in this press conference. Never. Which is fascinating to me, right? Because with all of the Biden crime family's involvement with China and with Ukraine and who knows where else, where they've gotten phenomenally wealthy from these connections as a family, Biden's brother and Biden's son Hunter have gotten phenomenally wealthy, and Biden himself is wealthy too, multiple multi-million-dollar homes, which is very questionable when you've been in government your whole life. The press corps doesn't ask that question. COVID was caused by China. will President Biden hold them accountable? That wasn't asked. But instead, the press asked Jen Psaki, the press secretary, well, what about the battle for the truth? And of course, the battle for the truth is normally in politics the fact that you have two parties, at least in the United States, and they argue over policy, and whoever makes the best argument wins. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about controlling the message. They're talking about censorship. They're talking about making sure that there's only one truth, and that truth is the truth that is force-fed to you by the Democrat Party and by their useful idiots in the media. And of course, Jen Psaki said, well, we're also going to be very data-driven. Yet, when she was asked about opening the schools, right? Opening public schools and what Biden's belief was on that, she, has an interesting payoff for the unions, right? Because the teachers' unions and the Democrat Party are one and the same. And the teachers' unions, for the most part in the United States, don't want the children to go back to school because the teachers' unions like the fact that they can teach from home, and they don't have as much work to do to actually teach kids in the classroom and keep them, basically watch them in the classroom and make sure they're learning. And in many cases, let's face it, babysit them. And it is hard. I'm not saying it's not hard work, it's hard work. But the fact of the matter is, many schools in blue states are still closed and the kids are suffering. But Jen Psaki said, well, part of the battle, the truth is that we're going to be data-driven about opening up schools. They know schools are closed, but we're going to be data-driven. We have a clip on that, and here it is.
With regards to reopening schools, what level of vaccination in teachers or students or level of testing does the administration think would be appropriate in order to meet the target date that the president has set?
This is a great question, and as I noted at the beginning, and as a mom myself, I want to know all the details as well. We're going to have more to share from our health experts in the coming days, and I will venture to get them in here to give you all a briefing on the specifics, but we really want to lean into them on their expertise on that.
In other words, there is no plan with the Biden administration to be data-driven on opening up schools. Unlike, the battle for truth, right? They have no interest in using data to open up schools. They just don't want to open up schools because they're paying off the teachers union. And of course, she's like, well, I've got, child two or kids, or I'm not really sure how many she has. And, I'm equally concerned. Look, I'm sure she's concerned about her child, but why is it that across the United States, private schools are open and they've been open for quite some time, and public schools in many of the blue states, if not all, are still closed, right? And they're not completely open. Why is it in Florida, which is a red state, that you have a governor that has given parents the option of sending your child back to school or keeping your child home and learning remotely? Why is that? Okay, that actually is a great solution because it gives options for everybody to actually do whatever they want to do. But the fact of the matter is, the battle for truth with the Democrat Party is to always pay off their the people that have gotten them there, and they're not really considered people that want to even look at the data and open up schools. So look, just go online, podcast listeners, do this. Go online and just Google or whatever service you use to search, whatever search engine you use, look up all of the schools in the country and all of the articles, the news articles about parents who want schools open, one article after another, about how upset parents are in this jurisdiction or this state about why schools aren't open yet. And I get this information all the time from parents in my district. I do. I have people calling me all the time, sending me emails. Why aren't schools open? And it's just ridiculous. And of course, everybody knows why, right? Because we have a teachers union, and it's really not the teachers, guys. So don't come after me on this, but the teachers union that's really like controlled by El Chapo. It's like the government crime family of government schools run by El Chapo to make sure that your kids don't get an opportunity to get back to school. And that is the battle for truth. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Biden press secretary is cryptic on unity. So Biden press secretary is cryptic on unity. So Jen Psaki pivots and allows Peter Doocy to ask a question. So Jen Psaki, of course, Joe Biden's new press secretary, but also she worked with the Obama administration for many years, as we've said before. She pretty much ignored Fox News' Peter Doocy for the entire press conference. And it was really kind of fascinating. So finally, Jen Psaki pivots and allows Peter Doocy to ask a question. And Peter Doocy's question is, it's amazing. No one in the entire press corps thought of asking this. He says, well, what about unity in America? What is President Biden going to do about that? We have that clip, and here it is.
Let's see. I'm sorry, I told you I was going to ask you. I just skipped over you.
That's
Go
all
ahead.
right. I'll take it now. So if President Biden wants a theme of his presidency to be unifying the country, does he think that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer should drop a potentially divisive Senate impeachment trial?
Well, he spoke today, as you all saw, about unity in his inaugural address and the importance of unity in bringing the country together, and the resolve of the American people in helping to get through this moment. We are confident, though, that just like the American people can, the Senate can also multitask, and they can do their constitutional duty while continuing to conduct the business of the American people. And his view is that the way to bring the country together is to address the problems we're facing.
What a bunch of BS. So the question was from Peter Doocy, which was funny, of course, because he was not allowed to ask a question until the very end of the press conference. And then, of course, Jen Psaki's like, oh, yeah, I didn't know you were over there to ask a question, even though, of course, he had been like raising his hand the entire time for like 35 minutes. And finally says, okay, you can ask a question now, Peter. So he asks the question. He says, what about unity? And she gives this BS answer, which is a non-answer. And how can you not know how to unify the country at this time? By the time you've been inaugurated and you're president of the United States and your entire inauguration speech was about unity, and then you have your press secretary out there, she's asked the simple question, how's he going to unify America? What's the plan? Well, the plan is we have a plan. So that's pretty much what the answer was. So then Psaki is asked another question, and this is also about how cryptic she is on unity. And the question is, she kept ignoring Peter Doocy, which of course you would expect. And the question is, well, what about holding President Trump accountable, right? We need to hold President Trump accountable, good old press corps. What do you think about that? What do you think about the Senate doing that? Is it a good idea to never let him run for president again and make sure that the Senate, gets rid of this impeachment thing and just make sure that he is convicted? And if he's convicted, then he can never run again. Typical press corps, of course. Listen to what Jen Psaki has and how unifying this is. Here it is.
Does President Biden believe that President Trump needs to be held accountable for the Capitol insurrection a couple of weeks ago? And does that accountability require that President Trump be barred from holding future federal office?
Well, Zeke, he has spoken very firmly and fiercely, publicly, about his views of the horrific events on January 6th. And he has also, of course, spoken with members of Congress about that, as you all know. But he is going to leave it to members of Congress to carry out their constitutional duty and determine what the path forward is and what the mechanisms are going to be, what the process will be, and what the timeline will be. Certainly, he ran against Donald Trump because he did not think he was fit to serve in office long before the events of January 6th. He is here today because he decided to run against him, but we're focusing on moving forward. We're focusing on addressing the issues facing the American public. And as you know, that means we're focused on our COVID package.
Yes, she's focused on unity. The Biden administration is focused on unity. Even though they're asked the question, well, what about holding President Trump accountable and convicting him in the Senate to make sure that he never runs for office again? She really didn't answer the question. Once again, super vague, all BS, which just shows you they aren't interested in unity. If they really were, the first thing they would say is, look, he's not president. He was just defeated. And since he's not here now in the White House and is not serving a second term, it's time to move forward and it's time to leave that part of American history behind us. That would be probably a pretty fair answer, which means that we're not going to try to pursue convicting the former president of the United States. But no, she didn't say that. It was like, well, The Senate can do whatever the Senate wants, and we're just going to sit on the sidelines, just let that happen, and we're not going to have an opinion, even though, oh, by the way, we want to unify America. We really want to unify it. So then the press corps asks, what about the United States' terrible image across the planet? What about that? Look, podcast listeners, tell me what you think about Jen Psaki's response, if that is unifying. Listen to this. Here's the clip.
Go ahead.
How does President Biden plan to recover the United States image around the world, and what is his priority globally?
Well, his priority is first rebuilding our partnerships and alliances around the world and regaining America's seat at the global table. And you can see that is evidenced in his rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, rejoining the World Health Organization, his plans to engage with partners and allies and work together to address many of the threats and issues we're facing around the world. But I think that is what you will see as his focus in the weeks ahead.
So the way you unify America and to regain, American prominence throughout the world is to rejoin the WHO, the same crooked agency that failed to warn the world about COVID, and of course to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, the same crooked group of countries that have decided to give China and India a pass, absolute polluters of everything you can possibly imagine toxic, and instead try to make the United States responsible for all that they are doing, which is just ridiculous, of course. And so that is Biden press secretary, cryptic on unity. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Chris Wallace says Biden's speech is the best ever. So Chris Wallace says Biden's speech is the best ever. Typical Chris Wallace. So Fox News host Chris Wallace designated President Biden's inaugural address as the best he's ever heard after the newly sworn-in president called for unity across the country. The Fox News Sunday anchor labeled the inaugural address as the best out of the speeches he's heard since the former President Kennedy was inaugurated in 1961. Podcast listeners, this is classic Chris Wallace. I mean, he is just so excited that he did his job as a news anchor to get rid of Donald Trump by hosting one of the debates and completely and utterly hosing Donald Trump in that debate. I'm not going to say that Donald Trump didn't also do a pretty bad job in the debate, because I think he did. But then didn't help the fact that Chris Wallace was asking asymmetric questions all throughout that debate. So Chris Wallace did his job to get rid of Donald Trump. And to show you how crooked Chris Wallace is, he, of course, is a talking head during the inauguration and says, that's like such a great speech. Oh my gosh, which speech was he watching? We have that clip, and here it is.
Martha, I thought it was a great speech. I've been listening to these inaugural addresses since 1961, John F. Kennedy, Ask Not. I thought this was the best inaugural address I ever heard. Obviously, a lot of this event today, a lot of the president's speech was colored by the emotion of the fact that exactly 2 weeks ago, 14 days ago, there was a mob of thugs, of insurrectionists, of domestic terrorists on the inaugural stand, and Joe Biden was saying that democracy prevailed. We were able to get through that, and he was talking about how we need to get through that in the future if we are going to be a united country. He talked about white supremacy, domestic terrorism. He said we must confront it, we will defeat it. My whole soul is in this, uniting our people. You know, I think it was less an inaugural address and more part sermon, part pep talk, talking directly to the American people, saying, hear me out. We have a right to dissent peacefully, but our disagreement must not lead to disunion.
So that is classic Chris Wallace. He's literally giving you the litany of items that Biden talked about in his speech and about, how unifying he was going to be and so forth. And then no sooner did the speech occur than Joe Biden gets to the White House and disbands the 1776 commission, right? The very commission that tries to create unifying history behind which we can all agree, which of course is the 1776 commission's purpose. But no, he disbands that. And then he, of course, halts the border wall because he doesn't believe that we are a country, which is, of course, why you wouldn't want a 1776 commission anyway. Meanwhile, Chris Wallace is like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. This is the best president ever. I mean, it's like the best speech I've ever heard. Joe Biden is in the early stages of forgetting a lot, or potentially the early stages of dementia, potentially, right? But certainly forgets a lot and has a difficult time remembering and articulating. And yet, of course, how can anyone expect that that would be the greatest speech? I listened to the speech, and it was all lies. And here's the thing. Chris Wallace talked about domestic terrorism, that the people that broke into the Capitol were domestic terrorists. And here's what I find interesting. If you were part of the 1619 Project, right? If you're part of that project, that's the project that the New York Times has promoted time and again, whose whole purpose is to undermine the Constitution of the United States and literally create a revolution in the United States to get rid of our republic and create a Marxist society. Without question, that is its goal. Aren't those people domestic terrorists that are literally trying to destroy our country? But they never talk about that. And who just disbanded the 1776 Commission? Joe Biden, who will no doubt embrace the 1619 Project. Joe Biden. And yet Chris Wallace thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. He's just going to be so unifying. And if you want more proof of that, we should listen to the press secretary of Joe Biden, Jen Psaki, who had her first press conference when she was asked about unity. And we have that clip. And here it is.
It was a call to our better angels, a call saying, look, we've got tremendous challenges, COVID, the economy, racial injustice, climate change, but there's nothing we can't do if we come together. And there's one other thing he said that I think especially us in the media must know. He said that there is truth and there are lies, lies that are told for power, and lies that are told for profit. And I think that it was a call to all of us, whether it's us on the air, on cable or broadcast, whether it's us on social media, on our Twitter accounts, understanding that we have to deal from facts, from the truth, to hear each other out, as he said, a right to disagree, but not a right to violence. This is the easy part, as has been suggested. Now he's got to turn words, rhetoric into reality and action, but I thought it was a great start.
So his view, the President of the United States' view about unity is to address the problems the American people are facing. What a bunch of BS. What does that mean? The question was, the President wants to unify people. Well, what about the Senate, which is now controlled by the Democrats, who want to convict the President of the United States after the House has impeached him? What about that? Because, we don't want the President of the United States to come back. And of course, Jen Psaki is like, oh, no, we're not going to talk about that at all. So that, by the way, was the very first press conference with Jen Psaki on behalf of Joe Biden. And so you have Chris Wallace is saying, oh, it's going to be such a unifier. I mean, this is the guy that's going to unify the country. And the rhetoric is so wonderful. And what I just don't understand is a critical thinker in the news media would say, yeah, the rhetoric sounds really good, but we're going to see if the actual policies follow the rhetoric, if they really do want to reach out to the 74 million Trump voters who were very upset about the outcome of the election and believe, and we need to say this, that there was a lot of irregularities in the way the elections were held and the way the actual election laws in most of the swing states were changed at the very last minute. No different than playing a sport, and at halftime they changed the rules to favor, of course, the team on the other side. That's exactly what happened here, and we know it happened because it's a fact. And unfortunately, of course, I don't think Jen Psaki and Biden is going to try to reach out to those 74 million voters because they're already saying, well, it's okay to go ahead and convict the President of the United States and we're just going to stand back and watch it happen. And so Chris Wallace, of course, and Jen Psaki, I mean, it just drives me crazy that Chris Wallace continues down this path. I don't even know why he's still there. And it's obvious why Fox is continuing to lose viewership because they let him be the face of these big events of inaugurations and so forth, where he's completely and utterly in awe of anybody who's a Democrat and of course thinks all Republicans are bad. And I think that's probably part of the problem, right? Because it's not about unity for them, and it's not about truth for them. It's just all about winning and getting in control and basically leading. So that is Chris Wallace says Biden's speech is the best ever. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. And I want to thank everybody for listening to Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Hopefully we'll be back on Parler soon, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.